Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Open Wide Our Hearts series based on the U.S. Catholic Bishop's Statement Against Racism. My name is Lynn Campbell and I'm the Director of the Office for Catholic Social Justice Ministry of the Archdiocese of Hartford, and I'd like to welcome you tonight. Since June, each month we have been focusing on an aspect of the Bishop's letter, a letter which calls us to listen and learn and have a conversion of heart, which leads us to strive to end racism so that we can walk humbly with our God and our brothers and sisters. So tonight, we are honored to have three speakers from the Waterbury area of the Archdiocese, known as the Three Amigos. It's going to be a wonderful interfaith discussion. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. With us tonight is Rabbi Eric Polokoff. He is the founding rabbi of B'nai Israel of Southbury, serving the congregation since 1997. He is active in Jewish and general communities, particularly as a leader of the Anti-Defamation League, the Connecticut Community Foundation, and the Southbury Clergy Association. We also have Imam Gazmend Aga, who is an imam of the Albanian American Community of Waterbury and a university chaplain at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield. Recently, he's also serving as a correctional chaplain. He was vice chairman of the Muslim Community of Albania, a lecturer at Bendar University, school director, and interfaith activist in Albania. And we have Monsignor Joseph Donnelly, who has served as pastor at Sacred Heart Church in Southbury since 2003. He has served several parishes in the Archdiocese and as a member of the priestly formation faculty at St. Thomas Seminary in Bloomfield and the North American College in Rome. He recently concluded a 12-year term as chair of the board of directors of St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury and now serves as Episcopal Vicar for the Western region of the Archdiocese. Together, they are good friends and known as the Three Amigos. So welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. And while they're unmuting, I will also just introduce that Sarah Nickel is a board member of our office, and she will be moderating the Q&A portion of the event. So if you have questions tonight, please type those questions into the Q&A box, and we will get to them later in the program. Thank you.
And thank you. As we three amigos speak to the Bishop Peter Razaza Conference tonight, we are grateful to Bishop Peter Razaza. He, together with Rabbi Herb Brockman and the Reverend Bronita Grubbs, they were the pre-Three Amigos. We pilfered our name elsewhere, but our work stands on their shoulders. Year upon year, Bishop Razaza was drafted to help deliver the invocation at ADL's Torch of Liberty dinner. Using the Jewish term for praying, an inside joke, each year he began, "Let us daven." Neither the appetizers nor Bishop Peter's intro ever changed. Themselves welcome traditions. For my part, having consulted the internet, I found a blessing for study in a 1916 Catholic prayer book that might also withstand the test of time. Incomprehensible Creator, the true fountain of light and only author of all knowledge, vouchsafe, we beseech thee, to enlighten our understandings. Turning to the sacred, to a God who unites us all, may we find blessing in the light of mutual encounter. Father Joe, Imam Ghazi, and I are delighted and honored to participate in this year's conference. And I will begin. Rabbi, priest, and imam, we've been doing our presentations by the sort of the age of our religious traditions. And so invariably, that meant that I have to go first. And long before anyone knew of Jewish space lasers. That's a joke. Imam Ghazi, Father Joe, and I set out to prepare for this session. That's true. I promised Imam Ghazi I'd keep my remarks brief. He was wary. You see him shaking his head. And at that, Father Joe laughed. I think he was skeptical. Perhaps in part because I have to account for nearly 4,000 years of continuous history in a few moments. The basic concept, though, which I offer with laser-like focus, is this. The Torah says each person is created b'tselem Elohim. Each person is created in the image of God. The rabbis further explain, and I quote the Midrash, a person strikes many coins from the same die, and all the coins are alike. But the Holy One of blessing strikes every person from the die of the first person of Adam HaRishon, yet no one is quite like one's fellow. We are to treasure our diversity as a sacred gift. Regarding the opposite, at Numbers 12, Moses' siblings, Miriam and Aaron, condemn him for having wed a Cushite, that is, a black Ethiopian woman. God is angered, and in a type of measure for measure, Miriam is punished temporarily for her race-baiting slander with a skin disease, making her whiter than white. At Ghazi's behest, I now fast forward the millennia. Here in America, such internalized lessons about justice and equality were particularly advanced within the 20th century civil rights movement. The NAACP was founded in a Jewish living room in New York, in part likening the Kishinev pogrom against Jews in Russia to the lynchings of African Americans occurring here in America. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was able to escape the Holocaust and was known as Dr. King's rabbi. You saw one of his quotes on the slide as we logged in this evening. Abraham Joshua Heschel put it best, and this is what he said. Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason. Racism is man's greatest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason. In a lesson that might especially resonate with Catholics awaiting Lent, Judaism sages taught that repentance is part of God's blueprint for the world. And just as times for introspection and improvement come each year, for Jews, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so too are ongoing opportunities to assess and redress inequality and injustice. May such understandings be readily accessible now in the wake of the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, the efforts to disenfranchise votes from African American counties, the disproportionate deaths from COVID-19, and last month's insurrection at the Capitol that included so many racists and domestic terrorists. Now especially, may we treasure our diversity as a sacred gift and passionately and effectively champion that message.
Great.
Father Joe?
Thank you, Rabbi. I think our experience over these last several years, having these sessions where we speak to different groups of people in different situations about how our own religious traditions approach particularly current affairs, we discover something which echoed back again through Rabbi's presentation, and that is how much we have in common. And over and above all the details of it, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, that's the great lesson of the three Amigos experience, not only for us as we seek to share it, but also in those from our own congregations or far and wide, way beyond our congregations, who come and listen to us talk about these things. What a great point of consciousness raising, that we understand that we are all coming at something like this question of racism in the same regard. Our Christian tradition, of course, is based upon the faith and tradition of our Jewish sisters and brothers, that we ourselves find the same basis, the same grounding in that wonderful creation account of God's creation of the human person, the love and the richness with which God did that, forming people, and the scriptures are abundantly clear. He formed them in his own likeness. He formed them to be something like him, to reflect his life, to reflect God's life. And so right from the start of Christianity, as it was for Judaism, and I'm sure for Islam as well, the great recognition that all people are created in God's image, that all people somehow reflect God, and that all people, therefore, are brothers and sisters. That basic line really sets the tone for what we want to speak about tonight. Racism, obviously, crept into not only just our society, but other societies, as people started to lose that sense that somehow we all belong to God and somehow we all belong to one another as a result of that connection. And so racism, seeing another person as inferior or unworthy of equal regard, to look at someone and see this person is different, and to take that as the essential quality of another person, that really is the root of racism. In our Christian tradition, right from the early start, there's a great quote from the first pastoral letter of St. John, where he puts it squarely to them. He says, "Everyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer, and there is no murderer has eternal life." Bottom line, it was that clear right in the first generation of Christianity as they grew. Now that obviously, and I know that racism shows itself in a lot of different ways, in words, in comments, in jokes, in disparaging looks, in more socially sinful structures like discrimination in housing or in hiring practices or things like that. And to the degree that we remain silent about that, we collaborate with it. We allow it to continue to grow. And the American bishops in a particular way recognized this. In 1979, they wrote their first pastoral letter on racism, directly calling racism sinful. But then in 2018, 39 years later, recognizing that racism was persisting. We might have thought in the 60s and 70s we were putting that behind us because we changed laws, because we made different structures in the culture, and we thought, okay, racism is gone. But the bishops recognized what so many other people did. It wasn't gone because it lived in the hearts of so many people. And therefore, the recommendation from the bishops of the United States and their document, Open Wide Our Hearts, which we saw as one of the titles of this webinar tonight, Open Wide Our Hearts, call for us to open wide our hearts, because the change is not going to come in making laws. The change is going to come in changing hearts. It's a matter of conversion, which in our tradition, and especially as we start to creep up on Ash Wednesday and the season of Lent, when all our tradition pays attention to it, much as the Islamic and Jewish traditions also have their particular days of repentance and atonement, we as we spend this time, we're aware that we need that conversion of heart. And the call to conversion is a strong part of our Catholic Christian identity. Pope Francis, in the first document he wrote, talked about the importance of the need to change, to recognize where we need to change our attitudes of mind and heart. And then he says, in quotes, "Let no one think that this invitation is not meant for him or her." So as we talk about racism, as we talk about the racism that we see in our culture, in people's attitudes, in sinful social structures that manifest racism in one way or another, we know that that call to conversion is not just for them out there, not for those other people. It's really for us. And we need to open wide our hearts to understand and appreciate that as best we can. We find racism in our culture all around, in people's habits and people's speech and in entertainment. Certainly, as Rabbi mentioned, the great attack on the Capitol building on January 6th, it was very clear that there were racist threads in the midst of all of that. And so we need to be able to recognize and acknowledge in the lives of other people, our sisters and brothers, that they, first of all, are our sisters and brothers. Our own founding documents say they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that recognition is even creeping into our founding documents. It is a challenging issue, and I think one that in recent years has really come face to face with us again. Our hope is, as this webinar series throughout the whole year in honor of Bishop Razaza really continues, that we find ourselves challenged to recognize the racist attitudes or behaviors or tones in our own lives, and the call to that conversion of heart to which Pope Francis speaks so clearly and loudly. So I pass it on to my good friend, Rabbi Imam Ghazi.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings of God be upon everyone. Thank you very much for watching us during the time of COVID. It's not easy attending a webinar, anything related to Zoom, anything related to technology. It isn't easy anymore. My 5-year-old son says that I don't like online school. And I'm sure some of you are hearing this from your children or your relatives. So we as three amigos, just to introduce, Rabbi Eric is the smart one, Monsignor Joseph is the good one, and they decided that I be the handsome one. But according to my mother, I am the most handsome in the world, as every son is for his or her parents. Well, dear brothers and sisters, there are some problems that came into this world with humanity, and one of those is racism. It is sad to see that is 2021 and we still see a lot of racism around us. As Rabbi Eric and Monsignor Joseph explained, racism doesn't come just as a discrimination of color or race, but comes in different ways. I think that tonight's webinar will focus more on racism related to color and, of course, to the belief too, because it's 2021 and we still are surrounded by anti-Semitism, by Islamophobia, and I would add religiosophobia. So there are some people who just, let's say, are racist versus everything religious. So racism is a belief that a particular race or religion is superior or inferior to another, and that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined by his or her inborn biological characteristics. So such racist attitudes are abhorred and condemned in Islam. It is important when we talk about racism according to religions, because if someone believes in God and is very careful in racism, it becomes his attitude not just when he is with people, because we know people who might be very careful towards racism because of their work, because of the opinion of people, because they're afraid to express their feelings, and they express their racist ideas when they are one-on-one. But for someone who believes in God, for someone who believes that God is watching him or her even when they are alone, it becomes very important. It becomes part of our conscience to stay away from racism. God says in Holy Quran, "O humanity, indeed we created you from a male and a female and made you into people and tribes so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most noble of you in the sight of Allah, in the sight of God, is the most righteous among you, and God is truly all-knowing." It is interesting because there is no notion of race in Quran. There is no word of any type of race. So the messages of Quran related to our equality, related to racism, are not messages just towards Muslims, but usually whenever these universal values are treated by Quran or by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they are usually called to humanity, to anyone, being a believer or not believer. These are part of being a good human. Dear brothers and sisters, there are two concepts of brotherhood in Islam. One is that we are brothers and sisters in humanity, and we believe that we are all children of Adam, Bani Adam. But there is also a fraternity, a brotherhood, a sisterhood in faith. Everyone is a brother and sister in his own faith, but we have this big picture of brotherhood and sisterhood in humanity. Why is this important? Because our faith can be fluid, can change. Its level can change. Today you can be a strong believer or a strong practicant of your faith, but tomorrow you might be weaker. But when it comes to humanity, we are always humans, regardless of whatever we do. So no one can claim that any superiority over the other based on race, based on color, based on language, or based on wealth. This is emphasized by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says that all mankind are from Adam and Eve. So we are all part of the same family. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also a white, says Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago, a white has no superiority over a black, nor does a black have any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action. So just to stay strict in our time, it is important to determine what makes us better from each other. According to Quran, according to Islam, the only thing that makes us better, it is our individual qualities, but with one explanation, that we as humans are not allowed to determine which qualities of each other are superior to other. So just God knows, and he evaluates our levels according to our faith, according to our actions, and according to our heart. I don't know if Rabbi Eric agrees, but we're waiting for his comment.
Listen, I'm happy that I covered my section in the amount of time which I did. So, Ghazi, Imam Ghazi, while you were speaking, a number of questions started to come in, and so clearly there's a lot for us to continue to talk about. So now the organizers had asked us to speak about our personal and our congregational impact of the work which we've been doing. Clearly, let me, for all of us, emphasize, we're not the first groups of clergy who have done and are focused on interfaith encounter and of teaching the way we do it. As I mentioned, indeed, Bishop Razaza is a model that way. Today is the day of all days. This is the 78th anniversary of what was known as the Four Chaplains. There were four chaplains, different faith groups who went down. The Dorchester was an American ship was sunk by a U-boat. These chaplains ministered to their the sailors and the people on the ship. They went down with the ship, praying arm in arm, having given their life vests so that others might have the potential to survive. That was 78 years ago today. So clearly, this is something which we're devoted to. We're devoted to because we stand on the shoulders of others who have done that before. Certainly for me, Ghazi and Joe are longtime friends before the three of us sort of teamed up in doing this. Our experience together has had a wonderful personal effect. And when we get to the congregations, it's had a wonderful effect on our congregations and community. Yeah. I should open, and we should spend a few moments on that at least.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up where Rabbi said. He and I had done a couple of things early on in our time in Southbury together, little programs of the Jewish and Christian tradition. But the three of us got together, and I can't even remember how it came up. But we decided we were going to have a series of 3 talks, one in each of our places of worship. And so the first one was going to be at Sacred Heart in Southbury. So I remember earlier that day, the custodian came up and said, well, how many chairs do you want me to set up down there? And I said, oh, maybe, 50, 60, 70, something like that. That should do it. But I'm not sure how many people would come because this was our first part of our roadshow. So I walked down there at 7 o'clock when it was a little bit before 7, it was supposed to start. We had over 400 people who came. We had to transfer the whole thing into our worship space. And that has always struck me as clearly saying, A, that people really have a curiosity about, for instance, other religious traditions, coming to learn about them. People have gone out of their way. Every one of that series of 3, we had over 400 in attendance at each one of the presentations. It was really extraordinary. It highlights for me the real goodness of people. I think we can get very discouraged, particularly in our current day, when the publicity is all around the harshness, the acts of violence, the acts of really discrimination, and in some cases even taking the life of other people, of other races, or the opposition to people in other religions. Anytime we start to think in terms of us and them about anybody, we are racist. As they pointed out, whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or whatever that is, the roots of racism are there, to see someone by their difference rather than by what we hold in common. Because as I said earlier, every time we come to treat a topic, we're always surprised by the fact that we all come out at the same place. We have different traditions and different experiences as to how that rolls out. But I think for our congregations, there has been such a wonderful turnout, which just shows that people want to know. People do not want to buy the message of racism in our culture. And when they recognize that they're doing it, or their group is doing it, or their nation is doing it, they can, I think, right in the heart, they must feel some kind of, there's something wrong with that. But they're seeking to learn and to get to know other people. I remember a couple of ladies from my parish coming out of the mosque the night we were at Imam Ghazi's, and both of them come up to me and they said, Father, I've never been in a mosque. And I'm like, good. They came in a mosque. They had been at the synagogue a couple weeks before. They were at our church a couple weeks before that. doing things like this, I think for myself, it's been a great insight, again, in the friendship that we share and all these kinds of things. But I think for our congregations in a particular way, it's our own religious congregations opening up the possibility of the real change of hearts, the real conversion of hearts, of attitudes, and hopefully then of behaviors on a topic like this, particularly, although we do a lot of other topics too, but it really is it's something that people desire. And I'm really happy that this little vehicle, which has been so enjoyable for us, has been an opportunity for people to get that better insight.
Eric, it seems that Joe is ready for the reopening. We just want this COVID to finish, and we're ready for to start our Three Amigos journey.
We take our roadshow again.
So, dear brothers and sisters, I have two kids. My son is 5 years old, and everyone knows, whoever has kids or whoever has relatives with small kids, that even kids can observe the sincerity. So everyone knows if their leaders are fake when they do dialogue or they are sincere. And I believe in the power of sincerity. And Three Amigos are three sincere friends who get their communities without prejudice. And by coming together, I just want to explain that it's not just three communities who come together. We are part of Interfaith Action Fellowship with more than 20 religious leaders from different parts of Greater Waterbury area, with different denominations, Protestants, Baptist Church, etc. So when people see us engaging with each other, when they see our friendship, I never saw two friends who are racist versus each other. If two people are friends, if a Muslim has a Jewish friend, he is not anti-Semitist anymore. If a Catholic has a Muslim friend, a Muslim neighbor, a Muslim student, a Muslim teacher, and of course had a good experience with him, so they are friends, they know each other, then there is no place for racism. And this is for any type of racism. So the positive effects of our relationship, first, are we see the results in our communities. So by engaging with other communities, you better understand your faith also, because you see your faith resonated in other communities too. So you better understand your faith. You better, if you are a Catholic and you see a Catholic, a Muslim, and a rabbi and a Jewish coming together and all explaining their differences, their colors, their wonderful approaches for the same thing, for the same issue, then they become more religious. They become they better understand their faith. So another thing that I would add, not to continue too much, because I'm not ready, it seems I'm not ready for the reopening, Eric. I would say that the more we continue, the more people remove their prejudices. Because we are people of faith, and we always do empathy. We always try to seek the reason of prejudice. Why someone is let's say, Islamophobe. Why does he hate Islam? Someone cannot hate something without knowing anything. If he has a hate, this must be cured. And we must do our part. How? One by one.
I think you're right on target, Ghazi. The idea of when people actually meet, unfortunately, a lot of us live in kind of a ghetto existence. We don't interact with lots of different kinds of people. We tend to stay with, as they say, our own kind for one reason or another. But the idea is when you come to know somebody else, as Ghazi had said, you get to recognize how much you have in common, that they are a good person, a nice person. You can enjoy their company, they can enjoy yours. Something starts to build up. That's what is the first step to breaking down prejudice and racism in a particular way. It's when we don't know and we allow, whether it's what's in the media or what somebody else told me or some fear I have, to rule the day. But getting to know somebody personally really opens our eyes. And so again, one of our intents of having these occasions that brought our three congregations together was that they would talk one to another. And we've had some great times with on that end too.
And I would add, as sort of my take on Ghazi and on Joe, words and our theme, words from the heart enter the heart. Ghazi, I think your point about sincerity is so well taken. Part of our message, and I think this is part of how it resonates, is that our approach, I mean, we're three representatives of three different faith traditions. In so doing, the three of us have each in our own way dedicated ourselves greatly to our faith traditions. And it's precisely that faith tradition, those core values, which is grounding this initiative and this effort. So it's not something which we're doing because we want to be nice or we want to be correct. It's part of what we believe our traditions at their core are teaching us. And that's the message that I think we share. That message, at least I know in my synagogue, and I think I know at Sacred Heart and at the Albanian Mosque, it's well received by our leadership. Our leadership is extraordinarily supportive of our efforts. In fact, they are prodding us each time we do. They're encouraging for us. When we were at the mosque, in preparing to go to the mosque, I had said to our community that there is a tradition at the mosque of women covering their heads. And sometimes folks will do that. And what's interesting is that there's also a Jewish tradition for people to cover their heads, including at times women, not so well followed. I saw more people from my community heads covered at the mosque than I ever saw in the synagogue. Why would that be? Well, in part it's because of the comfort of where they are in terms of their head coverings in their Jewish home. But the other thing which was happening was that people wanted to be there. People also wanted to be at the mosque respectfully, showing respect for Islam, respect for the community. And at a time when we were seeing so much animus directed specifically with Islamophobia and all the things which were happening, when we were doing some of our programs, each time we began, we would have to first talk about another prejudice incident which had happened, whether it was to the Islamic community or the Jewish community and the like. So there was a hunger to identify in doing the right thing. And I think that as we've sought to do that, our communities have been solidly behind us in so doing.
And I would add just two small examples for the same night. It was one Muslim sister who felt very comfortable using a headscarf for the first time in her life when she saw Christians and Jewish sisters doing the same in our mosque. And a brother came to me and said, you know what, Imam Ghazi, tonight I felt proud of being an Albanian and of being a Muslim because of the atmosphere that we had all together. Yeah. More than 400 people, different faiths. And I would add something which we are doing as three Amigos, is that when we do our tours and our classes, as we did at UConn, is that we treat very sensitive topics and we go deep in those. So it is very important that we still keep a wonderful relationship, a sincere relationship, and we treat topics very, very deeply according to our faith. So sometimes not just talking about peace and common things, but also going deeper in our faith and seeing the differences. I think this is a great message for attendees to see how we can elaborate our faiths, our differences, by respecting each other and by learning more about each other.
Right.
Right.
I see actually Lynn just signaled in and she says they have a lot of good questions and maybe we might start a little Q&A.
Yeah, great. There are a lot of questions, so I'm going to do my best. So bear with me here. It sounds to me, in hearing your remarks, thank you so much, that this idea of encounter is just so important to undermining racism. And you guys, your Three Amigos group and webinars like this are great examples of how to do that, because one of the questions we're getting in the chat by a lot of people in different ways is, you know, some concrete suggestions really. And in addition to this, you know, I think there are some people maybe in communities where things haven't been started and they want to know how maybe do I approach my faith leader or faith community to get something going or to encourage more interfaith dialogue on these subjects.
Well, I'd suggest that, you know, hitting it head on, especially if they were at something like this, not only shared the webinar tonight, but heard our story from our own religious congregations, you know, to approach the religious leader and say, hey, you know, I was at this thing the other night. It was great. They really talked about this, that, and the other thing. It was fairly easy to put together. Then, you know, if anybody wanted to call one of us, we'd be happy to give them some cues as to how they might do that. But I think that'd be a great thing to ask for, / challenge your religious leader to say, you know, this was really good. I think we need this, especially given the situation we find in our world and in our nation today.
Right, and I think our friendship gives us a sense of trust, and so I'd also say that we are allies amidst vulnerability, but that's the point. And we sort of need to have that. There is a text. I won't give too many texts, but there's a text that says who is strong, and the answer isn't who is buff. That would go to Ghazi. Who is strong? The answer is one who turns an enemy into a friend. So what we're seeking to do in terms of our work, and as it gets to what are the practical examples, we need to call out prejudice and racism. We can't give it a free pass. We absolutely have to separate and explain what is acceptable discourse and what is unacceptable discourse. At the same time, practically. So I saw one of the things just float by about hate has no home here. There are signs in the South Bay area. So I think in the chat, you can see that. We need to do things like that. We have to call out racism and prejudice. At the same time, our goal is not to humiliate the racist. Our goal is, as Joe said earlier, is to change hearts and minds. And so we have to be able to not only talk, but also to listen and work with people who we need to obviously help them see what's wrong with prejudice and racism.
I would add that racism is a consequence. It's not from birth. Like, for example, in my home, we never use names of colors when we talk about people, let's say. There's no problem of using, let's say, a color to identify someone, but because it's a very sensitive issue, I want my kids to be raised without that problem. So if when I see people who are Islamophobe or racist, I see that as a consequence of bias or misinformation. So I think the more work we do with removing the ignorance, because that's the root of every problem, the more we will see results. I'll just share a small example. I was invited to a church. I will not say the denomination, and the two members of the church, they left the church and they said, we will not be members anymore. But what happened in the end of the conversation was that some people came crying to me, hugging me, and of course saying, I'm sorry, but also saying that we need this. So there might be some consequences while we do these activities. There might be some Muslims who might not like our friendship. But trust me, if this grows naturally as we are, as three amigos are, the numbers are very, very, very slow. And by time, the healing will come for those two. When they see what we do, when they see the fruits of dialogue, I think that any heart will be healed and they cannot resist this. At least this is our hope and this is our goal.
Imam Ghazi, you gave me a great segue when you were talking about teaching children, because someone asked a question about how in your faith communities, in your religious traditions, do you kind of teach your children, and probably parents and grandparents too, who are influencing those children, to learn about, to view one another's faiths, and also I'll extend that off obviously to the concept of race. How are we, teaching our children well?
Well, as first I tried to explain when I was explaining the racism according to Islam, it is very important to know that a well-explained religion will keep our children away from any type of illness, and racism is illness by itself. So dogma becomes very important because the children will believe that God created us equally, and that is a fact. Children will believe that being white or being from Albania, it's not a choice. God created us. So, and believing that God created us like this in order to know each other better, in order to see our differences better, then it becomes easier. And of course, when you are a parent, you should be very careful for every word you use and being always sincere. Always sincere when you speak about a Catholic, always sincere when you speak about someone who is not from your race, etc. I would say just in 2 minutes. First, it is important to not forget that kids are influenced by internet, by movies. For example, if you watch too much Hollywood movies, we know what is the portrait of a Muslim. So it becomes normal for kids to have some prejudices about Muslims. So it is my duty to tell that that's not the whole story. Not all people are like that. Actually, this is one of the things which I face when people tell, Imam Aga, you are not like everyone. They want to say me a nice word, but that's not very nice. Like saying that you are not like everyone means that you are a very small percentage. Like just some of you are good, but the rest we know how they are. So it is important to counteract the negative narrative for any of communities. And of course, explaining the whole story, explaining the good stories, the good examples, talking about three amigos, talking about good examples in our story. And I think that it is important to make a role play example. Like, okay, you are racist. You think that this community is like this. Okay, let's make a role example. Like you be a Muslim and you face 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And by doing this, they kind of understand the one who harasses and the one who is the victim. If he is the same or she is the same, would be very careful next time. And of course, it is important to, as when Moses goes to Pharaoh to not just to debate, but to talk with him, in Quran, there is a very beautiful narrative where God says, speak to him with gentle speech, because perhaps he may take heed of the reminder of fear of God. So even with Pharaoh, even with the biggest enemy, gentle speech can change the world.
And let me just add, building upon Ghazi, obviously tonight's topic is race, and you have 3 white guys. However, we speak, each of us, as part of much larger diverse faith traditions. And, since it's the Archdiocese, let me shout out to Arthur Miller of the Office of Black Catholics, and a friend. In my synagogue, we have a really wonderful educator. And what she's been doing over the winter with our kids is we had a trip to Africa to meet the Jews of Africa. So we met, as it were, Jews in Ethiopia, and it's about 17-18% of the Jewish community are people of color. And in Israel, there's a large Ethiopian Jewish community. So we met them. We met the Jews of Uganda. We met white Jews in South Africa. This coming month, we're going to be headed to Asia. And so we're going to meet Jews originally from India. There's a Persian Jewish community. So part of what we need to do educationally, and I'm just talking from the narrow perspective of one synagogue religious school, but one of the things which we can do is specifically educate, because our traditions speak beyond the particularity of three white guys in such a way that it speaks to others as well. And our religious movements are more diverse than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think too, an important element, and this gets into a little bit of a delicate area, is what kind of preaching are people hearing? Is the question of racism brought up at all in a homily? Now, sometimes people say, oh, that's politics. No, that's morality. That's morality, and that is part of our tradition. That regularly in a homily there might be some references to the equality of all people, and and the sin, calling it a sin, the sin of racism, or in the prayer of the faithful at our masses, where we pray to be that be lifted, or that mutual respect grow among peoples who are different. All those kinds of things. I think when people come into a religious community and don't hear this issue addressed, and yet it's all over the news, it's everywhere, that's when people start to disconnect religion from life. And that's really that's the death throes for religion, I think, is when it ceases to be connected to life. So I think making sure that when we worship, when we gather people together, issues like this are brought up, whether for our enlightenment in preaching, or in prayer, or in exercises. We had a couple of wonderful groups. The Just Faith people have a great thing on racial equality. And we had two groups, 20 people in each group. They were too big. But anyway, and then pandemic came and cut it off. But just have people study this issue and see it in a more focused way. And then they become, like yeast in the community.
So I have a question that came in earlier, and it's regards to, elaborates on what you just said about you're educating your congregations, but are you doing anything in regards to diversifying your congregations?
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say that one of our challenges is that there was a report which came out just recently about the number of Jews of color. And if we look at our congregation, clearly what that suggests is that there are more Jews of color out there than there are here. And so absolutely, that's become something this year that our leadership is beginning to think through, and how do we address that, and how do we make it known that in fact this is a priority for us in the community. And while there have been Jews of color or dear ones married to Jews and part of Jewish families within our congregation, we need to now go back and analyze how they felt as being part of how normalized were they made to feel, and where do we need to practice our own form of change?
We live, both Rabbi Eric and I live in a community that's predominantly Anglo, and so the number of people who live there of color are limited, and it's really it's really hard to overcome that, given the territorial nature of parishes. We really have to, pay attention to how we do that, and obviously to be real clear about welcoming people into that. But right now, that's a real challenge for us, because again, not many people live in this area, and so wouldn't join the parish as such.
I guess
our mosque is in Waterbury, and there are 4 mosques in the city of Waterbury. Of course, the Albanian American community was founded as many churches and mosques by the first generation with two ideas, with the idea of keeping language and tradition, and of course keeping your faith too. But now it's the second or the third generation, and now more members from different communities, more members from different countries, from different races are being part. But of course, always there is a lot of work to do. And of course, we don't have time to elaborate, but racism is not just about color. Sometimes even being from the village or from the city, being from the north or being from south, being rich or being poor. So always there are challenges when it comes to this. We are happy to share that our president is a female. We have Christian members too. It's an Albanian American Muslim community with Christian members too. So I think that as coming from Albania, the religious dialogue, the religious harmony is a natural part of our communities. But when it comes to the racial thing, always there's work to do. And just 10 days ago, we were part of MLK Day in Waterbury, and I think that with Pastor Kreese and as a Interfaith Action Fellowship, we are kind of building a lot of amigos thing.
Mm-hmm.
So from 3 amigos to a lot of amigos, and I think that we can. I like the question that someone did here. We can have 3 amigos in every neighborhood. We can have 3 amigos at every workplace. So if we have this idea, I think that it will work wherever we are, regardless of our title.
Someone actually asked a question. Are there any similar groups that women have started, the Amigas at all, that you're aware of?
Not that I've heard.
We can facilitate.
Okay, great. Seriously though, turning to another question, sort of more of a pastoral question. Someone has asked a couple of different questions about how would you, especially in this time, either personally or people who are dealing with family members where there are big rifts in families, whether it's about racism, how do you respond to that in a loving way? It's so difficult right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, as Imam Ghazi said, there's something about sincerity, sincere, truthful, respectful conversations to be able to do that. And unfortunately, sometimes the questions arise at a time of great intense back and forth, or unfortunately, the issue has been overly politicized in our culture. So it immediately gets into a political thing that's really unfortunately, that's happened to a lot of our moral issues. And as a result, I think it's limited us in what we can do. I think people have to be able to meet each other. It's this experience of encounter and open up their lived experience. Because so much of prejudice, as Ghazi mentioned, is really based on, well, prejudice of its very nature is without knowledge. Before any kind of knowledge, I make this statement, or I hold this opinion. I don't have any idea about why, I don't have any proof for it, but that's what I hold nonetheless. So somehow we have to be able to bring a respectful dialogue, the culture of encounter, and some facts about, and one of the greatest facts again is about we are all God's children. We are very much the same, and we desire the same things.
Yeah, and again, humility. That when there are 3 of us, but we're not holier than thou. We all know that we've made mistakes. We make mistakes, and so the goal isn't to win an argument. The goal needs to be to share conviction, but with facts.
Another thing which I think made and is making this initiative successful is that it's not based on reaction. So we are not doing this just whenever there is a scandal or a problem or a reaction. We are building something. So when you do this continuously, coming to what Monsignor Joseph said about politics, when you do this, when you talk about racism continuously, the number of people who would complain for politicizing this drops dramatically, because we are talking about peace continuously, every 1 month, every 2 months, in different platforms, in different ways. And hopefully we're all praying, and actually we should pray for all the victims of COVID-19 and everyone who is a COVID-19 veteran, and I'm one of them, that this ends as soon as possible, and we go back to our church, to our synagogues and our mosques. We go back to hugging each other, because I think that we need this too. This staying away from each other is kind of pushing things in a bad direction too. So as you might have noticed, now forums are becoming very dangerous. People who discuss on Facebook messages and Facebook status, Twitter. So people kind of find places where to fight with each other. And I think that faith in this perspective is very, very important. Like being together with your brothers and sisters in your faith, with your brothers and sisters in humanity. It is very, very important.
I think that's one of the reasons really why people join religious traditions, because the traditions support the best values that they have, the mutual respect, all children of one God, all of that comes. And when people pull away from religious traditions, they lose a resource that reinforces that. You don't get it on Facebook, you don't get it online, you don't get it in the news, and unfortunately you don't get it in a lot of public conversation. But to hear over and over again, whether it be from the Quran or the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures, the constant theme that all three traditions have held down through the ages, and that this is important. And again, it urges then pastors and religious leaders to be much more forthright in preaching about this and bringing the connection between a question like racism and the tradition of faith that we all share.
And we have many, many allies. We're not inventing this. We have allies in many communities, in the African American community, in the Latinx community, in the broader beyond the Catholic community, in the Christian community. That there are a lot of people. There are a lot of good people out there seeking to do the right thing. And whom we can also likewise encounter and interact, and their work can strengthen us and hopefully a little bit us them.
I wanted to go to one of the questions that was submitted before the talk, and just to maybe see if you guys can help clarify a little bit when someone was asking about the use of racial terms. I think we were talking about the difference between racial awareness and racism. If you could speak to a little bit about, the idea of colorblind versus, again, racial awareness, because I thought you had some interesting points in our pre-conversation. That's
right, Rabbi.
Pre-game talk.
Yeah.
So let me start. What we know from our friends in the African American community, amongst others, is that the goal isn't to have a quote unquote colorblind world. The goal is to have a world of racial awareness where whatever our color, we are understood, accepted, not prejudged, and have pride in who we are. And so that's the goal. And when Dr. King was talking about content of character as opposed to color of skin, he wasn't saying that people won't notice and hopefully celebrate. Gazi, you're a
little guy.
He's very cute. He's very cute. Would celebrate. There's one biblical text. It says, "I am black. Some translations are but comely. I would tell you the best translation would be I am black and comely. That there are ways of finding positive messages, and that's what we should be doing. It's impossible at this juncture not to be aware of racial disparities. As an example, we have lots of work to correct that.
I also have a question going back to the unfortunate attacks on the Capitol last month and the religious symbols that were present during that. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, how you might be, or others, speaking to their faith communities about sort of the unfortunate use of those symbols.
Sure. I was, and I can't remember even the circumstances, but ended up watching when it was in newsreel afterwards or whatever, and they were showing the groups of people going up the stairs in front of the Capitol, and there was people going up with two people, and both of them, they were side by side, but they both had different banners that were carrying up the steps, and one of the banners said, "Jesus saves." Now, Jesus is never connected with violence or disrespect, or you're marching up to harm people or destroy a building or scream harsh terms at them and stuff like that. It was so, I found it jolting to see that banner in the middle of a situation like that, which spoke of everything in direct opposition to the teaching of Jesus, and certainly the traditions of Judaism and Islam as well. I find it highly offensive. I don't know how people make that leap. How you read the Christian scriptures and come up with, we're going to attack, this building and go against the election and whatever else was involved in that, and particularly a lot of the harshness. Even again, 5 people lost their lives in.
I'm sorry, I'm taking a moment to comb through the questions because there are so many and I'm trying to put them together here.
Everyone is struggling. My wife is struggling with 2 kids now.
I'm just trying to keep the kittens out of the room, guys.
Every time Ghazi's kids come on screen, they steal the show.
Yeah, just bring them back. No. Let's see. There was a question, and this is kind of going back historically because someone was wondering about the presence of slavery in our sacred texts. And I'm wondering if you can say a word about that, maybe, the historic context or the difference to what became modern slavery.
I think this is, we should talk with Sister Campbell to do a second 3 Amigos in order to elaborate slavery, because that is a very, very long story. Very long story.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Sounds like a good idea, because we have an awful lot of questions that we certainly cannot get to if we were to extend this for another hour. And very intelligent questions too. Just a wonderful audience that we have with us this night. But I think, Sarah, I don't know if you see anything shouting out at you, or else we'll wrap.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of questions and I've tried to group some as much as I can. And I know you've addressed many of the ones here in your remarks. I think, people are certainly looking for opportunities and creating those opportunities for encounter. Guys,
it occurs to me, excuse me, Sarah, it occurs to me that something like this is helpful. It illumines us. We learn about other traditions. We look at that issue of racism. But the question that always ends up at it is, what are you going to do with this?
Yes.
What are you personally? What's one thing you could do in the next 24 hours that would be some kind of a disciplined stand read something, reach out to someone, do something in your parish, whatever it is.
Share.
I think it's so important we can sit and listen to these things and be wowed by these three handsome religious leaders and then say, okay, but that's got to touch me. Because as we said in the beginning, if the change is not a change of necessarily of behavior, it's a change of attitudes, which means it's a change of heart.
Yes.
How am I going to allow my heart to be changed by what I heard tonight? And I think it has to get real concrete. Like I say, in the next 24 hours, what's one thing I could do? What's one article I could read? What's one conversation respectful that I could have with somebody else? What kind of outreach might I do that would connect me with, help me to encounter someone from a different tradition or ethnic background or racial background than I am?
I would suggest
That's
too,
where
who
the
can I
rubber meets the
share?
road.
Yeah, and who could I share this recording with as well?
Exactly. Who am I going to send this recording out to?
Absolutely, yes.
That's right.
Well, I think, I appreciate you taking the extra time, and just if anyone has any final parting words, but that was excellent.
It's wonderful to be here, and certainly to do it, as a tribute to Bishop Razaza, who worked so hard for all these kinds of issues within his priestly and Episcopal ministry over the years of after his ordination. I mean, he's been a great leader in our diocese in that regard. Taught a lot of us in the seminary at some point in time or another, but I think it's really good to be able to do this. I think this can be a nourishing experience tonight again, and important to see how that spills over, because I think that's how conversion takes place.
Yes, and again, it's an extraordinary honor to be with you and to do what we're doing in so many ways, where we're carrying forward the work of our teachers. And so thank you so much.
So thank you very much. I'll conclude my words by reading what Salim Ahmed just said here. He said that from now on, we should be amigos of each other. And I think that's a great message.
Amen.
Well said.
Amen.
Amen. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to do just a quick plug to announce our next webinar, which is on March 10th with Sister Doretta D'Albero. She's one of the Sacred Heart Sisters, and she's going to be talking about Pope Francis's newest encyclical called Fratelli Tutti, which is on friendship and fellowship, and relating it to how can we grow in our understanding and practice to real racial equality. So after this webinar, you will all receive a link to this recording, so you'll have it to share with people, and information on how to register for our next webinar. And
I just add one more thing, Lynn. Excuse me. I noticed this when I was working up the talk. Tomorrow is what they call the Day of Human Fraternity. It commemorates a year ago when Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Cairo signed a document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. It's a great document. If you want to read it, it's not that long. But I thought it was kind of, and I was saying to Ghazi and Eric before, isn't this fascinating? We're doing this tonight, and tomorrow is this. The UN has set tomorrow as the Day of Human Fraternity, the International Day of Human Fraternity. So I would say by what we did tonight, we're probably preparing for a good day of human fraternity tomorrow. But isn't it interesting, again, the great desire and the goodness in people's hearts. They do not want division. They do not want racism to rule the day. They want to live in respectful relationship with others, all brothers and sisters in one God. So may it be so.